Hey friends, how's it going? Ash here. Welcome back to Extra Gents. Hope that you're doing well. You're looking marvelous. Today we're talking about flankers. What's a flanker? I feel like I have a decent handle on that after all these years. At least I would hope I do. But for a lot of people who are getting started into fragrances, learning about fragrances, collecting fragrances, they may see flanker online over and over and not really know what that is or why there's so friggin' many of them. And so today we're doing that. We're talking flankers. I'm gonna go over a whole bunch of very common examples of flankers and try to explain in basic layman's terms what flankers are. That way, if you are a beginner, you can come away from this video and have an idea of what a flanker is and why they exist. So as I said, a bunch of different fragrances that we're gonna be going over today. I am not gonna link all of these in the description below. But here are a bunch of codes that you can use if you would like to use these to save money at any of these different websites. That's cool, save money, woo. Newest one is the perfume box, Gents, 10% off for that website. And of course, we got Frag Flex, Max Aroma, Twisted Lily, all the goods and services. All right, let's start talking flankers. I guess first off, why even do a video on flankers? Because I know a ton of people, the overwhelming majority of people that watch my videos, they know what a flanker is. But we gotta think back. We gotta think back to when we were just getting started, did not know much about anything at all. There can be a lot of vernacular when it comes to fragrances that can just be confusing. And this is actually a thing that I get asked fairly often through emails, people asking for more detail on flankers. So I figured let's put this out there, hopefully help some people out. So what is a flanker? Well, a flanker is essentially an offshoot or a continuation of an existing fragrance line. And I'm gonna show you guys some examples that are pretty easy to understand. We'll also go into what is not a flanker, some things that maybe would be confusing, but we'll start here right at the beginning. So we're gonna start with this beauty, Acqua di Gio. Acqua di Gio Eau de Toilette. This fragrance was my signature scent for quite a while, many years ago. It is the best-selling men's fragrance of all time. At least last I looked, I guess it still is. It still is a top-selling fragrance in the United States, in the world, a top 5 bestseller. So I'm assuming pretty much all of you out there, 99.9% of you, you know what Acqua di Gio is. And this is what came first. Acqua di Gio Eau de Toilette. This is the first release that kicked off the whole line, so it started here. Obviously, that means this is not a flanker. Anything that started a new line is not a flanker. Now, that can get slightly confusing sometimes, and we'll talk about that more here in a second, but let's keep focused on this, okay? So the fragrances that came after Acqua di Gio Eau de Toilette in the same line were flankers, are flankers. Flanker. So for example, Acqua di Gio Essenza, which I should have brought that bottle out, but Acqua di Gio Essenza, that was a flanker of this. Acqua di Gio Profondo, this is a flanker of Acqua di Gio. There's really no limit on how many flankers there can be. You could have technically like 500 flankers. You could have 500 Acqua di Gios that came after Acqua di Gio Eau de Toilette, for example. Also, Acqua di Gio Eau de Parfum. This is a flanker of Acqua di Gio Eau de Toilette. Now, some people may view concentration differences as a little bit of a different thing than a flanker, but really just to keep it very simple, this is a flanker of that. Same thing with Acqua di Gio Profumo, Acqua di Gio Absolute, all of those are flankers of the original. Now, sometimes you can have a flanker of a flanker. So that would be this, for example, Acqua di Gio Profondo Lights. If you want to keep it very simple, you would just say that this is a flanker of the original. It's something that came out in the line after the original. But if you wanted to go a step further, you would say it's a flanker of a flanker because this is a flanker of Profondo, which is a flanker of Acqua di Gio Eau de Toilette. Yeah. And you can say, like, for example, if they came out with Acqua di Gio Profondo Lights Absolute, you could say that's a flanker of a flanker of a flanker. And this line is pretty easy to wrap your head around, at least when you look at it with these fragrances here, because all of these fragrances, you can draw back to the original Acqua di Gio. When you smell this, or this, you know it's an Acqua di Gio. It has that DNA from the original in these. So this one, pretty easy to understand. Let's go to something that's a little bit different, YSL's L'Homme. So this is an extremely popular fragrance, has a great opening. Very, very easygoing, ginger and citrus, extremely appealing off the top, very popular even to today. Now, this is a flanker of that. L'Homme Eau de Parfum, right? Very simple. It's in the same line with the same name. Really, the only thing changed as far as the naming conventions goes is the concentration. L'Homme Eau de Parfum. And there are many L'Homme flankers, some discontinued, some still available for sale. One of my favorites was L'Homme Ultime. That was just a flanker of L'Homme. Now, this is where things can sometimes get confusing. This is La Nuit de L'Homme. A lot of people know La Nuit de L'Homme, just about everybody, right? Great date night fragrance, a lot of cardamom in there, really sexy. La Nuit de L'Homme is a flanker of L'Homme, but it was very successful, and it spawned its own line of fragrances. Here is La Nuit de L'Homme de Parfum, for example. This is a flanker of this, and when this was released, this was a flanker of that. Yeah. So it's not always super cut and dry in the sense of it being the exact same name as the original, with just a different sub-name. La Nuit de L'Homme, The Night of the Man, when this was released, was essentially the evening counterpart to this. But then this took off in a big way and spawned its own line of fragrances. So now you have the L'Homme line and the La Nuit de L'Homme line. And at this point, most people probably don't really view this as a flanker to this. But if you want to get down into the nitty-gritty of it, when it was released, that's what it was. So keep in mind that sometimes that might be the case. So that's one of the things that can get confusing for guys sometimes when they're trying to learn about this stuff. Another example would be the Amen line. So you had Amen, and that was the original, Angel Men, and then you had the Pure line, or not even really the Pure line, but just the line of Amen flankers that came afterward. Had Pure Havane, Pure Malt, that's why I said pure. But then you also had Ultra Zest, Cryptomint, just a whole bunch of other fragrances in that line. All of those were flankers to the original Amen, but most of them weren't super close to the original Amen. Some of them were closer, like Pure Leather was a little bit closer, but a lot of them were their own thing completely. And then you even had some spin-offs there, like Pure Malt Creation, which was a flanker of Pure Malt, which was a flanker of Amen. And then you had like B-Men, which B-Men was kind of its own thing. Again, I know it can get confusing. Let me go through a couple other examples here. I guess let me touch on this first. These fragrances, just as an example, it's not just these, but just as an example. These are from the Dunhill Signature Collection. And when you look at this, you would think, well, those could potentially be flankers, right? Because they're all in the same bottle. They have similar naming conventions, not in the sense of their name, but in the sense that they're all underneath that Signature Collection. So here we have Agar Wood, Egyptian Smoke, and Amalfi Citrus. All three completely different. And these are all part of the same collection. None of these are flankers. I know that's very obvious to the overwhelming majority of you, but when you're getting started, maybe you see these fragrances in a similar collection and you think to yourself, well, are those flankers? Could they be flankers? No! With, again, some exceptions, right? So if Dunhill came out with Amalfi Citrus Parfum, for example, that would be a flanker of this. Or if they came out with Egyptian Smoke Noir, that would be a flanker of this. But as it stands, these three are completely different from one another. They're just in the same collection. And the same goes for this one, which could be even more confusing. This is Supreme Oud, Supreme Leather, Supreme Cashmere. Now these are discontinued at this point, but it's just to emphasize this, to make a point. These are all from Ralph Lauren, and this you may view and go, well, those are definitely flankers. Definitely. Supreme Cashmere, Supreme Oud, Supreme Leather, they're all Supreme whatever, they gotta be flankers. Not really. This line was done as kind of a collection, essentially. The Supreme collection, the Supreme line, you could say. And I know this is the Acqua di Gio line, this is the L'Homme, La Nuit de L'Homme line. Supreme line was still flankers, right? No. The idea behind these was to do, obviously, a specific type of fragrance, leather, oud, cashmere, in a way that was warm and a little higher end compared to what they were releasing at the time. So all part of the same collection, but it's not something where you had this one come first, and then like a little branch that comes off to your flanker and another branch to your next flanker. That's not how these were released. So here, I'll show you this and you tell me, is it a flanker, is it not? Luna Rosa Black. The answer is yes, this is a flanker of that. Does this smell like that? It does not. Does this smell even close to that? It does not. But this is part of the Luna Rosa line that started here, and then you could kind of draw like the branches off as the new flankers came out. As an example, there is Luna Rosa Sport, or was Luna Rosa Sport. That was a flanker of Luna Rosa. Then you had Luna Rosa O Sport, which you could think of either way, almost a flanker of a flanker with Sport, O Sport, or just as another flanker of this, but either way, it ties back into Luna Rosa. And even though Luna Rosa Black does not smell like Luna Rosa, it is a flanker. Interlude, Memoir, Interlude, Black Iris. Presentations, obviously extremely similar, all from Amouage. This, no relation. This is Memoir Man, it has nothing to do with Interlude. Interlude Black Iris, though, that is a flanker of Interlude. Original Sauvage, Sauvage Eau de Parfum, Sauvage Elixir. This is a flanker of that, this is a flanker of that. You can draw these all back to the original Sauvage because this is the originator of the line, even though Elixir does not really smell like Sauvage Eau de Parfum or Eau de Toilette. So do flankers even have to smell close to the original fragrance that they're a flanker of? No, they don't, as evidenced with Luna Rosa here or Sauvage Elixir there. So why even do that then? Like, why come out with it as a flanker if it doesn't tie in to the original? And this has been talked about ad nauseum. Some people like flankers that are pretty close to the original so that you can clearly see the DNA of the original defined in the flanker. And then other people will prefer a flanker that's quite different, does its own thing because they don't want to really rehash the same thing that's been done. The simplest way to think of it, why would they do that, is marketing. If you already have an established name, Sauvage, the #1 selling fragrance in the world for men, it makes sense to put out your new release, your Halo release in that line. Because if everybody already knows Sauvage, that's most of the battle done for you already. You're starting on third base like you hit a triple, but no, you started there. So that's why. That's really the main reason. At least for fragrances like Luna Rosa Black that are very different, or Sauvage Elixir that's very different. Because you already have a built-in audience, you already have a defined process here for the bottles a lot of times. You just kind of switch up the color scheme and everything, but most of the work is done for you. So it cuts down on costs. You don't have to introduce a whole new line to people and try to advertise that. It just makes it a lot easier. And then with other flankers, like say Interlude Black Iris, it's because they want to take the original DNA, but do something a little bit different that maybe they think would work better, and sometimes it does. And then still other times, like over here with Aqua de Jo, maybe you do a flanker because you're trying to do something that smells a little more modern than what the original one was, but you still want to have enough of that DNA in there so you don't alienate the people that already love the line. And again, it's pretty easy to market something like that when you already have a built-in audience. So that's why you're going to see flankers over and 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 over again.
It's over and over and over and over and over again.
When it comes to new releases compared to a whole new launch of a new fragrance with a new name, with a new bottle, with a new idea. That costs more money, and you also run the risk of it flopping and losing the company money, which they don't want to do that. So that's why you will see popular lines over and over come out with flankers. And it's not always a bad thing. There are some flankers that are absolutely fantastic. So I would caution you, if you're just getting started, not to fall into a mindset of all flankers are automatically trash, because you will miss out on some absolutely amazing scents. Sometimes it can get a little overwhelming. Sometimes it can get even a little bit boring with some lines where they rehash the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. But there are always gems that come out every year, and a lot of those are flankers that kind of sneak up on you out of nowhere. And one other thing that I forgot about that I'll touch on very quickly here right at the end, limited edition fragrances. They can be flankers, but not always. I'll explain. So this is CK1 Reflections. This is essentially the summer release of 2023 for CK1. They do a summer release every year. Those I do consider flankers, just like CK1 Shock. this is a flanker of CK1, even though, again, it does not smell like CK1. It's in the CK1 line, it's a flanker. So these summer releases, these I consider flankers. Some people may not really consider them flankers because they're a limited edition summer release, but I think most people would. They come out for 1 year and then they're gone, replaced with a new summer flanker the next year. And a lot of lines will actually do that, not necessarily summer flankers or summer editions, but they'll do a limited edition every so often. But there are some limited editions that I don't consider flankers at all. And those are gonna be typically holiday releases. Jean-Paul Gaultier's Le Mans is a good example of this. So they'll do a Christmas edition each year where it's just Le Mans. It's the same Le Mans that's always been, the classic Le Mans, right? But they'll put a holiday spin on it, whether they paint the bottle a different color or they'll put like a jacket on it, like a Santa Claus type deal or something, and then they'll release it as a special holiday edition, right? Those aren't flankers. It's the same fragrance, it's just dressed up. And a lot of brands will do that. Paco Rabanne does it with some regularity. Carolina Herrera does it with some regularity. So those special limited editions that are basically just a pimped out bottle, those aren't flankers. That's the same fragrance, just with a different get-up, different clothing scheme, right? So there, now we finally have the quick and dirty rundown on flankers. Essentially, you could think of it as like tracing the fragrance line back to the original. That's the original. And then the spin-offs that come afterward are flankers. And sometimes you'll have very successful flankers that then spin off into their own type of fragrance line or flankers of flankers. But taking Luna Rossa, for example here, Luna Rossa is the OG black. That is a flanker. Extreme, flanker. It's discontinued. Sport, flanker. Oh, sport, flanker. Potentially flanker of flanker, but probably just a flanker, I think most people would say. Or is it a flanker? A flanker and a half? Luna Rossa Carbon, that's a flanker. Luna Rossa Ocean, that's a flanker. Luna Rossa Ocean Eau de Parfum. And then it becomes interesting if Luna Rossa Ocean Parfum comes out, because then you have the Eau de Toilette, Eau de Parfum, and Parfum, and at that point, Luna Rossa Ocean is almost its own thing. But ultimately, you can still trace it back to Luna Rossa. But that gives you an idea of what people are talking about when they say flankers. I'm gonna put all these back where they go. Thank you guys for hanging with me. Stay safe out there. I'll see you tomorrow with another fragrance video. See you guys later.